Hi, let's talk about some autumn reads. Hi, I'm Colleen. On this channel, we talk about books and writing. In the description, as always, I will have a link to my newsletter where you can follow me along for all things bookish and some links to my books, including Waiting for His Mate, my new release coming out on September 19th. It is a spicy, paranormal, fantasy, shifter, romance, and I'm really excited for it to be out in the world. If you are new here and want to jump straight to the books, I'll put a timestamp on and you can just click it and get straight to books. If you're someone who likes to hang out, let's banter for a little bit. So my voice might be slightly different, and that is because I have had an ungodly amount of dental work done in the last 3 weeks. I think I've had 7 dentist appointments. I am genetically predisposed to poor teeth. I take better care of my teeth than most people in the world, I believe, by far, and still have a lot of problems. So if you notice I'm not opening my mouth very wide or some of my speech sounds a little different, that is the reason. But let's go ahead and get started talking about books. I have a nice big stack right here, which goes much further down, but you can see the tippy top of it, with all my favorite autumny reads. I am going to do a separate video for both dark academia books and witchy books, because if I did one video with both general autumn, dark academia, and witchy, it would be over 45 minutes. And while there are a lot of booktubers who release videos that are that long, I don't really like to release anything over 30 minutes. I have like 1 or 2 videos that are longer than that. I like to keep it a little tighter. It's who I am. So we're gonna go ahead and start with a book that I actually haven't read yet. I bought it last October on like October 28th, I think, but it was super on sale, and I was like, well, I'll save it for next October. And that is October Country by Ray Bradbury. This is a collection of macabre short stories. Ray Bradbury wrote Fahrenheit 451, but he also wrote, I'm gonna forget what it's called now. It's called like In a Summer's Day or All Summer in a Day or something like that. But it was like, you know, you have like a disturbing short story you read as a child in grade school and it stuck with you forever. That is mine, his story. I'm going to write down the title of this because I do have to Google it to make sure it was correct. So there you go. That is very disturbing. So I will probably in October read a handful of these stories. Probably not the whole book because I want it to last more than one October. But this I've heard is a fantastic autumn read. Every other book on the list I've already read. Next, we're going to stick with a classic, and that is The Fellowship of the Ring by Tolkien. This book gives me such fall vibes. 1, I've read it 2 times, both times during the fall, which I think is part of it. But 2, also, this is very much like the autumn of the world. So the elves, who have been kind of in charge of Middle-earth, are exiting and leaving, and they are not going to be a part of this world anymore. So it's very much like the autumn of their species. Also, it just has that like sort of nostalgic feel, I think, that we all get in fall compared to other seasons. If you haven't heard of Lord of the Rings, which I find hard to believe if you're on BookTube, it is an epic fantasy story that pretty much became a blueprint for a lot of epic fantasy for the next like 60-ish years in literature. It's a very grand scale of good versus evil with hobbits and elves and dwarves and men, and some of my favorite characters of all time are in here, particularly Samwise Gamgee. Next, if you are in a creepy mood but don't really like to be scared, like me, I recommend Small Angels by Lauren Owen. This is a cottage gore book, which it's classified as gothic fiction, but like if you've heard of that subgenre, which is like evil cottage core, this is definitely the best book I've ever found to fit into that. It's about small angels, which is a church in a town that sit on the edge of Mockbeggar Woods. And this woods is alive in the sense that it is like a singular thinking, reacting entity that has very strong opinions about who can and cannot be within its boundaries. There are so many timelines in here and multiple narrators. My favorite narrator is the like present day narrator, who is a bride who's engaged to a man who grew up in Small Angels on the border of Mockbeggar Woods, and she decides she wants to get married at the church, and he doesn't stop her. And you slowly get to kind of watch her realize how many things are wrong with this place. Other plot lines are like a woman who, when she's a teenager, is part of the family that has to like appease the woods. Another narrator is that girl's like girlfriend sort of when they're younger, and then we jump to present day when they're adults. We have a narrator that's like 200-ish years ago. Definitely creepy, but without like terrify you. Like you're not gonna not be able to sleep. I mean, maybe you wouldn't be able to sleep, but like I think you'd be fine if you put your closet light on. Next, I have a cozy historical fantasy, and that is The Magician's Daughter by H.G. Perry. This is about a girl named Biddy, and she lives on Hy Brasil, which is a magical island that's kind of like cloaked from the rest of the world, including other magical people, off the coast of Ireland. And she has a guardian named Rowan, who is a magician. And his familiar also lives with them. His familiar is like sometimes a rabbit and sometimes a human, which was pretty cool. The story takes off when Rowan doesn't come home one night. So he, what do they call it? Transfigures into a bird and leaves the island sometimes. And one night he doesn't come home. And that sort of throws Biddy into this like magical world in London that she hasn't known existed. It takes place in the very early 1900s, like before World War I. It might be the late 1800s. I can't remember. It's either like late 18, early 1900s, pre-World War I. But we get a lot of great like England at that time. We see sort of the poverty of the orphaned population of London. We've got great magical vibes, but definitely like there's peril, but it's not one of those fantasies that's you couldn't classify as cozy. I do think you get a lot of good cozy vibes while reading this. Another historical fantasy I have on here is The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner. This is the woman that wrote The Lost Apothecary, which I think is very good, but has winter vibes. This one has more autumn vibes to me. So in this, we follow Lena, and her sister has recently been murdered, and she wants to figure out what happened. So she seeks out Vaudeline, who is a spiritualist her sister was sort of training with when she died. And the two of them go to London and become embroiled in this plot with the London Seance Society, which is a men-only spiritualist group. And this is like at the height of like, everyone in London wants to go to a seance. Like that's very much like the seance craze is going on. And you sort of unwind this murder plot as well as spiritualism at the time and who's real and who's a fake. I thought it was very interesting. If you like a sapphic love story also, there's one in here. It's not like a high fantasy, but there's definitely some fantastical elements. So I think historical fantasy is the best way to classify this. Next is a book everyone's heard of, and it's The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I read this last September, cried for like 3 days afterwards, but it does give me such fall vibes, not only because I read it in September, but portions of the book take place in New York City, which I don't know, unless we're like specifically celebrating Christmas or everyone's in a bathing suit, I feel like New York always feels like fall. I don't know why I feel that way. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but it always feels like fall to be in New York. This is about Addie LaRue, who in the 1700s makes a deal with a demon that she won't have to marry this guy that she's supposed to marry. She will live forever, but no one will ever be able to remember her. And oh my gosh, this book is so heartbreaking. But then one day someone remembers her, and then you get the story of them. It's beautiful. I almost bought another V.E. Schwab today when I was running errands at Target. I always let myself look at the books at Target. And I looked at A Darker Shade of Magic, and I read like the first paragraph. And then I read the first paragraph of a bunch of other books and then said to myself, you've got like 25, more than that, 45 unread books at home. Don't buy them. But if you loved The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue and you've read A Darker Shade of Magic, please put in the comments whether or not you think I will really enjoy it and should I get it. Because I love buying myself books. Okay, so next I have a book I just finished. And it is The Invisible Hour by Alice Hoffman. And I mean, come on, have you ever seen a more autumnal cover than this? Okay, Alice Hoffman, oh God. She's one of those writers that I'm like, if only I could write like you, because she just has this like amazing ability, I feel like, to get you so invested in a character so quickly. So we have multiple narrators in this, and it's only 250 pages, and I feel so invested in all our narrators. Our first narrator is Ivy, and she is a teen who gets pregnant, and you don't really know what time period you are. To me, it felt before my teenage years. I was a teenager in the 90s. It felt earlier than that, but I don't know. It was pre-cell phones. That's basically all I can tell you in terms of when we are. But she runs away from home and ends up getting sort of like taken in by this cult. Our next narrator is Mia, her daughter, who ends up escaping the cult. And our third narrator is Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author of The Scarlet Letter. So this book has like two very distinct halves. The first half of the book is about Ivy and Mia and getting away from the cult, and Mia finding a copy of The Scarlet Letter and it basically saving her life. And then the second half of the book is about Mia's relationship with Nathaniel Hawthorne. And I'm not going to tell you anything else. It is a fantasy, like straight fantasy, like not magical realism, because Alice Hoffman does write a lot of magical realism. This is straight fantasy. And it's so beautiful. I like to read like one or two books usually over Labor Day weekend. And this was one of the books I read over Labor Day weekend. And honestly, I read like 175 pages the first day, and then like 75 pages the second. It was such a good read. I can never do an autumn reads video without being a good author and telling you that I wrote an Autumn Vibes book. I used to write under the pen name Lucy Hudson when I wrote contemporary romance, and this is my Halloween fall vibes romance, Something Wicked. This is about a man named Caden who moves to New England, and he meets a teacher named Ginger who is obsessed with fall, and he's not really into fall. And she decides she's going to take him on a month's worth of autumnal dates to make him fall in love with the season. It's an extremely cozy romance, but it is spicy, just to put that out there. But if you've always thought watching like a Hallmark movie with like a corn maze and like the main character is a second grade teacher and they have chili and bake pies and go to haunted houses and stuff like that, and you thought, wow, I wish they banged at the end. There you go. Now let's go into some thrillers that will give you good creepy fall vibes without being too scary, because if you know me, you know I don't like horror, and I have to like keep it in the fairway or else I can't sleep. The first is The Stranger Behind You by Carol Goodman. Most of hers take place in winter. This one takes place from like August to November, so you get fantastic fall vibes. You're also in New York City, and I love those New York City fall vibes, as I said earlier. We have multiple narrators in this one. The first one is Joan, and she's a journalist who has just written like a tell-all about this media magnate being basically like a serial sexual harasser. And this article she wrote has blown up. She's gotten this insane book deal. Her life is about to change. She goes out to celebrate with her friends, and on her way home, she's attacked, and she gets a head injury and gets chloroformed. This very much affects the way she thinks throughout the rest of the book. She gets very scared of being alone, and she decides to move into this building that's called The Refuge. It's a former Magdalen laundry, which were more popular in Ireland than in the United States, but basically they were for like fallen women. Like if you got pregnant before marriage, you'd go here, work in terrible conditions until you had the baby, and then the baby would be taken away from you. She moves into that building because the security is really good. Our other narrators are Melissa Osgood, who is the wife of the media magnate, who feels like Joan ruined her life and starts stalking her. The third narrator is Lillian Day, who has lived in the Refuge / Magdalen laundry for like a really, really long time, and she's very elderly. She's in her 90s, and she's got a good secrets surrounding her. This was very fun. Melissa Osgood was one of those characters that you hated her, but she was well written to hate. So I enjoyed this book a lot. My next thriller is Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. This is about a family who are all meeting on an island on Halloween. And the island is one of those places that like when the tide comes in, it's an island. When the tide goes out, it's a peninsula. So everyone comes in before the tide comes in. They get there before the tide comes in, and then they're stuck there. So it's got that like locked island vibe. It's basically about the matriarch who's made a lot of money deciding who's getting what in her will. It's got such And Then There Were None vibes. So if you like And Then There Were None, you'll really like this book. I loved this book until the end. I didn't love the ending, but I still think it's a fantastic read, especially in the fall. It gives you such good creepy, like stormy October night feels. So enjoy it. Next, I have 2 books by Simone St. James because I couldn't pick one. And she's like really good. So I have the Book of Cold Cases and The Broken Girls. The Book of Cold Cases has 2 timelines. One is in the 70s and one is like 2017, I think. It's present day. In the 70s, there have been a few murders in this small Oregon town, and the serial killer responsible for them is dubbed the Lady Killer. Beth Greer is like an older teen. I think she's like 19-ish. Is tried for these murders, but she's found not guilty. And everyone thinks she did it though. In present day, Shay Collins is a true crime blogger, and she is also a survivor of an attempted murder when she was a child. She reaches out to Beth Greer to interview her, and then the interview takes place. And that's kind of what the story is about. It's about both of their stories, both of their paths, and then what happens when they meet each other. And I really enjoyed this book a lot. The Broken Girls, which if I'm going to be honest, I like this one more. This is my favorite Simone St. James of the 2 I've read. I still need to read more. Has 2 timelines as well. One is, I think it's 2014, and Fiona Sheridan is a woman who she's like never accepted the fact that the man who murdered her sister, who's in jail for it, that there wasn't like more going on. She doesn't like that guy. She doesn't think he's innocent, but she's very much convinced there was more going on. And this murder happened 20 years ago when she was young. Her sister was in high school. She goes to the property where her sister was murdered, which is this like condemned old boarding school, and she finds a body. But it's like a body from such a long time ago. It's a skeleton. So then her other timeline is the 1950s, where there's this group of friends going to this school, and you like slowly figure out which one of them is the body. This book was fantastic. If you've never read a Simone St. James before, definitely read this one. I bought this on a whim last November from Book of the Month as an add-on because I was like, if that cover doesn't scream November, I don't know what does. And I'm so happy I did because obviously I love this book, and then I ended up loving the Book of Cold Cases also. I have a few more books that are books I've either gotten from the library or have on my Kindle or have lent out to people, which I don't have to show you physical copies of, so I will just put up pictures here. The first is the first 2 books in the Wayward Children series by Seanan McGuire, Every Hearted Doorway and Down Among the Sticks and Bones. I haven't finished the series. I'm about halfway done with book 5, and I'm not sure how many are out right now. I think they're going to be 10 total. But these 2 in particular have real fall vibes. Every Hearted Doorway, we follow Nancy, who is a new student at Eleanor West's home or school for wayward children, which is a place that kids can go to if they've walked through a doorway to a different world, but then returned. So think about like Alice going to Wonderland and then coming back. These kids that come back are very like unable to live in regular society, so they can go to this home and hopefully their door will reopen and they can go back to their true home. So Nancy gets dropped off by her parents, and she serves as kind of like, you know, our eyes into this new world. But during her first few months there, students start getting murdered. It has a good murder mystery plot. It also has some dark academia vibes, but they don't really like go to class, which is why I didn't put this in my dark academia video. The second book, Down Among the Sticks and Bones, is actually a sort of prequel about 2 of the students, Jack and Jill, who are identical twins, and the world they were in before they came to the school. And this has such autumn Halloween vibes because their world, which is called the Moors, is like mashing up Dracula by Bram Stoker and Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. It's kind of like taking those 2 worlds and mixing them into one world. And it was so creepy and like perfect to read in like September, October, November. And I might be my favorite in the series. I did really like that one a lot. Next, if you'd like to read a cozy mystery this fall, might I recommend The Murder of Mr. Wickham by Claudia Gray. This is basically if you take a main couple from each of Jane Austen's main 6 novels. So we've got Mr. and Mrs. Darcy. We have Colonel Brandon and Marianne. We have Fanny and Edmund. What's his name? Edmund. Fanny and Edmund. Emma and Mr. Knightley. Captain Wentworth and Anne. And then we don't have Mr. Tilney and Catherine from Northanger Abbey. Instead, we have their daughter. And they're all at a house party at the Knightleys. And Mr. Wickham shows up. And it comes out that he has wronged all of them in some way. And then he ends up murdered. And Mr. Darcy and Lizzie have brought their son, Jonathan. And he and Miss Tilney, whose first name I can't remember right this second, have to solve the murder. Very cozy, very Jane Austen vibes, but like in more of a gothic manner. It definitely feels most like Northanger Abbey. If you would like to read a tried and true historical romance with autumn vibes, I would recommend It Happened One Autumn by Lisa Kleypas. This is the second book in the Wallflowers series, which is a 4-book series with a Christmas novella tacked on. And it is about Lillian Bowman, who is an American heiress who's come to England to sort of find an aristocratic husband so she can have a title. And she's loud and she's brash and she is not at all like the proper English ladies. And Marcus Westcliff, who is a stuffy, cold lord. And they hate each other until they realize that maybe all this passion isn't hate. I really enjoyed this one a lot. The Wallflower series is most famous for the third book, which is called The Devil in Winter, which is about, what's his name? Sebastian St. Vincent. Is that his name? Yeah. But I'm going to be honest. Because I read these books in order, I liked this one better because St. Vincent is kind of a villain in this book. And while I have forgiven him now, like 10 years after reading it, more than that, 15 years after reading it, when I originally read The Devil in Winter, I was like, I don't know if I buy it. For a contemporary romance, I recommend Hard Pressed by Kate Canterbury. Now, in this one, we have Annette. As it opens, she is heartbroken. The man she thought she was going to marry is gay, which I guess book 1 in this series is about him falling in love with the guy he falls in love with. But I didn't read that book. I got this book as like part of like a fall bundle, which was very nice because I end up loving Kate Canterbury a lot. But she's at a bar in her town just like crying her face off, and to the point where the sheriff of the town, Jackson, is like, I'm gonna walk you home, like you need to go home. And so he walks her home and she has him take her all the way up to her apartment, and as soon as they're in her apartment, she just like takes off all her clothes and attempts to seduce him. Now what she doesn't know is that he's actually been in love with her for a really long time and is like, oh my god, are you joking me? But of course he's a good guy because he's obviously a romance hero, and he puts her to bed and then gets the hell out of there. The next morning she wakes up and she remembers everything. So she bakes him like muffins and writes him an apology note. And from there, we get their romance. It's very small town. It's very cozy. It's very spicy. Don't go into this thinking it's a Hallmark movie. And I loved it. Now, if you would like a paranormal romance, I would recommend either or both Hunt the Moon and Touch the Sky by Carrie Cole. These are shifter romances that take place in, I think, Montana, but maybe Idaho. The first one, Hunt the Moon, is about a woman who shows up to go to her foster brother's wedding and then realizes that everyone there is a wolf shifter, minus her foster brother, and she's a wolf shifter, but she's always been taught to like suppress her wolf, and all hell breaks loose. Very fun. And her mate is there. Book 2, Touch the Sky, is about a shifter who is named Vaughn, who is half wolf shifter, half eagle shifter. So he has like 2 spirits in his mind. And then a woman named Hannah, who is a wolf shifter, but also a witch. And when they meet each other, he's like obsessed with her, but she doesn't smell like his mate and he can't figure out why. That is one of the best romances I've ever read. I've read it more than once. I love it. Sadly, there was supposed to be a 3rd book in the series, but I'm pretty sure publication got canceled, which makes me sad because I would have loved it, I'm sure. Lastly, if you want something that's going to give you all the fall vibes that's super fast, go to your library and check out Fangs by Sarah Anderson. It's a real quick graphic novel love story about a vampire and a werewolf. It's adorable. I think I read it 2 falls ago. I was trying to remember. And it was like a beautiful day, and I just put a chair in the corner of my yard and read it in about 45 minutes. It's a really fast, adorable read. Definitely gets you in the fall spirit though. And those are all my autumn read recommendations. I hope there was something on the list that piqued your interest. If you are still hanging out, please let me know what your favorite book to read is in the fall. And if you want to leave a comment that doesn't have words in it, drop me a maple leaf emoji. We're getting into the season where all our emojis are going to be maple leaves. As always, I hope you're in the middle of a good book, about to start reading a good book, or about to start writing a great book. I'll see you soon.